Example problem 4, factoring a difference of two squares. What is the factored form of 16x squared minus 81? Right away you should recognize this is a difference of squares. Note there are only two terms. It's a binomial. There's no x to the first power term here, just an x squared term and a constant. Notice also that the first term is a perfect square. Keep in mind that the square root sign can apply both to the 16 and to the x squared separately, if you'd like to think of it that way. The principal square root of 16 is 4, and the square root of x squared is simply x. Notice also 81 is a perfect square. The principal square root of 81 is 9. This leads us to the conclusion, using what we know about difference of squares when factoring trinomials, that our factored form will be the square root of our first term plus, in one binomial, minus, in the other binomial, the square root of our second term. A quick FOIL to check. Combine like terms. And we are right back where we began. Excellent. And a chance to show that you have got it. A, what is the factored form of 25d squared minus 64? And B, a reasoning question. The expression 25d squared plus 64 contains two perfect squares. Can you use the method in problem 4 to factor? Explain your reasoning. A quick look back at problem 4. And back to our problem at hand. Don't forget, anytime you begin to factor a trinomial, or in this case a binomial, any polynomial, you should always consider whether there's a greatest common factor that can be factored out of all terms. When you factor out the GCF of a polynomial, sometimes the expression that remains is a perfect square trinomial, or the difference of two squares. You can then factor this expression further using the rules from this lesson. Here's a great example. What is the factored form of 24g squared minus 6? First note, we have some common factors. 24 and 6, those are both even, so 2 is a factor. 4 would be a factor of 24, but not a factor of 6. 6, a factor of both. So we can factor out 6. Remember, factoring out a single term is like undistributing. So now as we fill in these parentheses, we think about 6 times what would give us a product equal to 24g squared. Well, 4g squared satisfies that. 6 times 4g squared is 24g squared. Then 6 times what gives us minus 6? Well, 6 times minus 1 gives us minus 6. So there we factored out 6. What we should do always, after factoring out a greatest common factor, is consider the value within the parentheses and determine whether we can factor that further. In this case, we have a nice difference of squares. You may not think of 1 as being a perfect square, but it is. The square root of 1 is 1, And therefore, we can factor this as, just let the 6 hang out on the left as we do the factoring on the right. I've inserted brackets here to have an extra layer of grouping symbols to help us keep everything organized. The square root of 4g squared. The square root of 1. 1 plus, 1 minus. A quick check. 4g squared minus 2g plus 2g cancels. Minus 1. Perfect. Now we can rewrite this without the extra set of grouping symbols. And we're done. And a chance to show that you have got it. Question 1 of 2. What is the factored form of 12t squared minus 48? Work carefully and make your selection from the choices below. And got it, question 2 of 2. What is the factored form of 12x squared plus 12x plus 3? Work carefully, make your selection from the choices below. And your lesson check for this section. The first 2 questions here from the Do You Know How section. Questions 3 and 4 from the Do You Know How section. And finally, questions 5 through 8 from the Do You Understand section.